I am Nia, 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. Numbers never lie, but my family certainly does. I had just closed on my dream home, a stunning 5-bedroom estate in Atlanta, paid entirely in cash. I was standing in the breathing in the scent of fresh paint, when a massive moving truck pulled into my driveway. Out stepped my older sister Chloe, her husband Brad, and their 3 children followed closely by my parents Vivian and Marcus. I watched through this glass as my mother pointed at my front door and told the movers where to take their boxes. I stepped out onto the porch, and my mother looked at me with a demanding smile, telling me to open the door because they had it all planned out. She said Chloe and Brad were taking the master suite, the kids would take the upstairs bedrooms, and I could set up a nice little space for myself down in the basement because we are family. I just smiled, locked the heavy deadbolts, and activated the security system right in their faces. Before I tell you what Brad pulled out of his pocket to threaten me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build a fortress to protect your peace from the people who share your blood. Growing up in our household meant living in the shadow of Chloe. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When she married Brad, a tech guy who loved throwing around buzzwords and acting like he was the smartest person in any room, my parents treated him like royalty. Brad walked around with a sense of entitlement that my parents not only accepted but actively encouraged. They always expected me to be the safety net for Chloe and her family. I was supposed to be the quiet sister who worked hard, stayed out of the way, and handed over my resources whenever they asked. But I was not that girl anymore. I had spent the last 10 years building a highly successful career tracking down hidden assets and unraveling financial fraud. I lived a quiet life, saved aggressively, and made smart investments. Buying this house in a prestigious Atlanta neighborhood was my ultimate milestone. I had kept the purchase completely secret from my family because I knew exactly how they operated, or at least I thought I did. Standing on my own front porch, looking at the moving truck idling in my driveway, I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. Someone at the bank or the real estate office must have leaked the information to my father. Marcus always had connections around town, and he loved using them to keep tabs on everyone. Vivian marched up the steps, her designer handbag swinging on her arm. Nia, stop playing games and open this door right now. The movers charge by the hour, and Brad has important calls to make once we get his home office set up. I stood my ground, leaning against the heavy oak door. There is no home office for Brad here. In fact, there is no home here for any of you. This is my property. I bought it with my own money. You need to turn that truck around and leave. Chloe scoffed, adjusting her sunglasses as she corralled her 3 children on my front lawn. Oh, please, Nia, do not be so selfish. You are a single woman. What are you going to do with 5 bedrooms all by yourself? Brad is going through a transitional phase with his startup, and we need a place to stay to save money. Mom and Dad already said it was fine. I looked at my father, who was refusing to meet my eyes directly. You told them it was fine to move into a house you do not own. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice taking on that familiar authoritative tone he used at church. You have always been stubborn, Nia. We are doing what is best for the family. Brad is a white man in the tech industry, trying to build a legacy for your sister and your nieces and nephews. He needs a stable environment to secure his next round of funding. You have more than enough space, and as your parents, we decided this arrangement makes the most sense. You will take the basement, and we will all be a happy family. The sheer audacity of his words hung in the warm Atlanta air. They genuinely believed they could claim the biggest achievement of my life and hand it over to a man who had never done a hard day of work in his life. Brad had bounced from one failed crypto venture to another, always using Chloe and the kids as an excuse to avoid real responsibility. And my parents, blinded by their desire to boast about their entrepreneur son-in-law at Sunday dinner, were perfectly willing to sacrifice my sanctuary to support his illusion of success. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The exterior security shutters began to slide down over the lower windows. The electronic locks clicked loudly into place. I looked directly at Vivian and Marcus. My name is the only name on the deed. Nobody steps on this grass without my permission. If those movers bring one box past the sidewalk, I am calling the police and reporting a home invasion. Brad stepped forward, pushing past my mother, His face was red and he used that specific condescending tone he always reserved just for me. He pointed a finger inches from my face. Are you crazy? You think you can just shut us out of here? Your parents already signed a master lease agreement with me for this property. I am a legal tenant in the state of Georgia. You cannot evict us without a court order and a formal eviction process. I froze. The words echoed in my mind. Master lease agreement. As a forensic accountant, I dealt with property laws and financial documents every single day. I knew for a fact that I had never signed a lease agreement with Brad or anyone else. I had closed on this house just 48 hours ago. What lease are you talking about? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Brad smirked, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket and waving it in front of the glass. The one your father signed as your legal proxy. A 10-year lease with fixed rent. We have the legal right to occupy this premises, Nia. So you can either open this door and play nice, or I can call the authorities and show them my paperwork. Your choice. My mind raced. A legal proxy. I had not given my father power of attorney since I was 19 years old and studying abroad. That document was supposed to be destroyed over a decade ago. If my parents had somehow kept that old power of attorney and used it to sign a fraudulent long-term lease behind my back, they had crossed a line from toxic family dynamics straight into federal crimes. I stared at the smug expression on Brad's face. He thought he had won. He thought his forged piece of paper gave him power over me. He thought the system would protect him because it always had. My mother stood behind him looking triumphant, confident that I would back down to avoid a public scandal in my new upscale neighborhood. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply looked at the document in his hand and then looked him dead in the eye. I turned my back to the glass door, leaving Brad red-faced and furious on the porch. I walked slowly toward the massive stone fireplace in the center of my new living room. The heavy thuds of his fists against the reinforced security glass echoed behind me, but I did not flinch. My phone vibrated intensely in my pocket. The screen flashed my father's name. I swiped to accept the call and placed the phone on speaker, setting it down on the marble kitchen island. Marcus did not even bother with a greeting. His voice boomed through the empty house, dripping with that familiar, authoritative rage he usually reserved for his sermons at church. "Nayu, unlock that door right this second. What is wrong with you? You are embarrassing this family in front of the moving company, and you are humiliating your brother-in-law. Brad is a proud white man trying to provide for your sister and those 3 beautiful children. You are out here treating them like common criminals." "They are trespassing," Marcus, I said, using his first name to show him exactly where we stood. "This is my house. I bought it with my own money. You do not get to dictate who lives here. You selfish, ungrateful child," he shouted. "We raised you better than this. Chloe is your flesh and blood. Those mixed kids need a proper backyard to grow up in. You are a single woman who sits on a laptop all day. You do not need 5 bedrooms. We made a family decision. Brad has a legal contract." Outside the window, Brad held his phone to his ear. I could hear his muffled voice through the glass shouting that he was calling the Atlanta Police Department. I was reporting an illegal eviction. He was claiming squatters' rights. "Let him call the police," I told my father calmly. "Let the police come and explain to a grown man that he cannot steal a house." "He is not stealing," Marcus shot back. "I signed the paperwork myself. I am your proxy, Nia. I have the legal authority to manage your assets. Now open the door before Brad presses charges and ruins your career." I ended the call. I did not shed a single tear. Tears were a waste of hydration, and crying was for people who did not know how to read a balance sheet. I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and flipped it open on the kitchen counter. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged directly into the Fulton County Clerk of Superior Court database. I bypassed the standard public search and used my professional credentials to pull up the exact deed and title history for my new property address. There it was, filed just yesterday afternoon, right after I had completed my final walkthrough. It was an addendum attached to my property record. A 10-year residential master lease agreement. The monthly rent was listed as exactly $0. The designated tenants were Chloe and Brad, and the signature at the bottom of the page belonging to the property owner was not mine. It was signed by Marcus, acting as my legally appointed proxy. My mind snapped back 14 years. I was 18 years old and packing my bags for a study abroad program in London. My parents had sat me down at the dining room table, sliding a thick stack of papers toward me. They told me it was standard procedure. A general power of attorney so they could manage my student loans, handle my bank account, and take care of my financial aid paperwork while I was across the ocean. They promised they would destroy the document the moment I returned to the States. They lied. They had kept that piece of paper tucked away in a safe for over a decade, just waiting for the perfect moment to weaponize it against me. They had used my own identity to hand my multi-million-dollar home over to my sister and her husband on a silver platter. They thought I would just submit to their authority because I had always been the quiet one who kept her head down. I downloaded the fraudulent lease and forwarded it directly to my personal attorney with a high-priority flag. But as I watched the file transfer, a sudden realization hit me. I stopped typing and stared out the window. Brad was pacing furiously on the lawn, while Chloe wiped fake tears from her eyes, playing the victim for the moving crew. My mother Vivian was rubbing Chloe back, glaring daggers at my front door. Something was entirely wrong with this picture. 6 months ago, Chloe and Brad were living in a spectacular $3 million penthouse in the heart of Buckhead. Brad drove a brand new Porsche. Chloe wore diamond tennis bracelets and carried imported bags that cost more than my first car. Brad was constantly bragging on social media about his cryptocurrency startup. He called himself a visionary. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on, treating him like the next tech genius. They loved telling everyone in their social circles that their beautiful daughter had married a wealthy white entrepreneur who was going to change the world. So why was the great tech genius standing on my lawn on a Saturday morning, begging to live in my basement rent-free? Billionaires do not pack their entire lives into a rented moving truck and forge lease agreements to steal houses from their younger sisters. People who do that are desperate. People who do that are entirely out of options. I opened a new tab on my browser. I did not care about the forged lease anymore. That was a simple fix for my lawyer to handle on Monday morning. I wanted to know what kind of fire Brad was running from right now. As a forensic auditor, I knew exactly where to look when the money stopped making sense. I bypassed his flashy social media profiles and dug straight into federal bankruptcy filings and state civil court dockets. It took me exactly 4 minutes to find the first red flag. Brad's startup had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection 3 weeks ago. The company was completely liquidated. But standard business failure did not explain the sheer panic I saw in his eyes outside my window. Startups fail every day. Tech bros simply dust themselves off and find new investors to fund their next big idea. Brad was not just broke, he was terrified. I dug deeper, tracing the corporate officers listed on his bankruptcy filing. I cross-referenced the names with recent property foreclosures in the Buckhead area. Their luxury penthouse had been seized by the bank 2 months ago. They had been secretly living in a short-term rental ever since, hiding their financial ruin from the world. But even a foreclosure did not explain why my parents were so desperate to secure this house for him. Vivian and Marcus cared about their church reputation and their social image above all else. If Brad was just a broke failure, they would have quietly distanced themselves to avoid the embarrassment. Instead, they were actively risking federal forgery charges to put a roof over his head. They were willing to sacrifice my property and my future just to keep him happy. I pulled up the creditor matrix from his bankruptcy filing. It listed all the entities Brad owed money to: banks, private lenders, vendors. Then I saw a line item that made my blood run cold: a massive secured loan filed just 8 months ago. The lender was not a commercial bank or a venture capital firm. The lender was a private family trust. The exact name of the trust was the Hattie Heritage Foundation. My breath caught in my throat. That was Big Mama Hattie Trust Fund. That was my grandmother retirement account and the financial safety net for our entire lineage. The ledger showed a massive withdrawal. $2 million had been wired directly from Big Mama account into Brad cryptocurrency exchange right before the market crashed. Brad had not just lost his own money. He had taken my grandmother's entire life savings. And based on the lengths they were going to today, Vivian and Marcus knew all about it. Sunday morning arrived with a heavy downpour, but that was never an excuse to miss service at Greater Hope Fellowship. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary, wearing a tailored navy suit and my favorite pearls. Normally, the usher board would greet me with warm hugs and church bulletins. Today, the greeters barely made eye contact. The air in the foyer was thick with whispers and the sharp scent of my mother's favorite floral perfume. I did not have to guess why. I stepped into the main sanctuary, and the scene unfolding near the front pews looked like a poorly directed stage play. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, had positioned themselves perfectly in the center aisle. Vivian was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, while Marcus stood with his head bowed in mock heavy sorrow. But the real star of the show was Brad. Brad was performing the role of a lifetime. He stood talking to Pastor Miller, holding his youngest daughter on his hip like a prop. Brad's face was flushed and he was actively crying, real actual tears rolling down his cheeks. He was weaponizing the very thing society had taught him would always work: white tears. I stood in the back aisle and watched him work the room. He was telling anyone who would listen that he was just a hard-working father trying to provide for his family. He claimed he had hit a temporary roadblock with his tech startup and simply asked his wealthy sister-in-law for a temporary place to stay. Then he dropped the poison. I heard him tell Deacon Hayes that I had slammed the door in their faces because I resented him. He actually fixed his mouth to say that I harbored some deep-seated prejudice against him because he was a white man who had married into a black family. He looked down at his mixed-race daughter, and his voice cracked perfectly on cue. He told the deacon that I despised his children and could not bear to see them thrive. He painted me as the bitter, angry, and single black woman who was punishing her sister. Beautiful, multiracial family out of pure jealousy. And the worst part was that the congregation was eating it up. Vivian nodded along, loudly agreeing with every word. She told the church mothers that my career had made me cold and calculating. Marcus added that money had corrupted my soul. I stood completely still as the camera of my mind seemed to spin a full 360 degrees around the sanctuary, capturing the hypocrisy on every single face. These were people who had known me since I was a child. They had watched me win academic decathlons and secure full scholarships. Yet they were entirely willing to believe the word of a crypto scammer simply because he knew how to cry on demand. Pastor Miller took the pulpit to begin the service. I took my usual seat 3 rows from the back. The pastor did not preach from the scheduled text. Instead, he launched into a highly specific sermon about the prodigal daughter. He spoke about the sins of pride and greed. He looked directly at my row and his voice echoed through the sound system. He declared that some among us have allowed earthly wealth to harden their hearts against their own flesh and blood. He said that a woman who turns her back on her family, especially innocent children, is a lost soul walking in darkness. The congregation murmured their agreement. My mother raised her hand in a dramatic display of praise. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, keeping my face completely blank. It was a barrage of text messages from Chloe, who was sitting just a few rows ahead of me. I opened the thread. Chloe had typed a wall of text. "You are destroying Brad. You are making him look like a failure in front of his peers. He lost a massive investment opportunity yesterday because he was too stressed about being homeless to take the investor call. You have to fix this, Nia. You have to give us the keys to that house right now. He is the father of your nieces and nephews. You are supposed to provide for this family when we need it. You are single, and you have no one else. Stop being so incredibly selfish and do your duty." I stared at the glowing screen. She was demanding that I hand over a multi-million-dollar estate to a man who had just stolen her grandmother's retirement fund. She actually believed her husband lies about an investor call. She was entirely brainwashed by a man who used her as a shield for his financial crimes. I did not reply to her text. I did not stand up and shout my defense to the congregation. I did not shed a single tear to match Brad's performance. I simply placed my phone back in my pocket, stood up smoothly, and walked out of the sanctuary before the choir could even hit the first note of their closing hymn. I drove back to my secure paid-in-cash fortress. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee and walked into my new home office. The church could have their emotional performance. I preferred cold, hard data. I sat down at my desk and cracked open my laptop. The previous day, I had found the initial breadcrumbs of Brad bankruptcy and the stolen $2 million. Today, I was going to secure the federal documentation. I logged into the Public Access to Court electronic records system. The PACER database is the federal repository for all bankruptcy and appellate court records. I pulled the complete Chapter 7 docket for Brad cryptocurrency exchange. The deeper I dug, the more pathetic his lies became. The documents showed that Brad had not just experienced a market downturn, he had engaged in gross negligence. He had used corporate funds to pay for Chloe designer bags, expensive vacations to Dubai, and leases on luxury vehicles. He had treated investor money like his own personal piggy bank. When the crypto market dipped, he panicked. That was when the $2 million wire transfer happened. I tracked the routing numbers listed in the federal disclosures. Brad had convinced my parents to help him drain Big Mama Hattie Trust Fund. He had funneled the $2 million into a shell company registered in Delaware, which then transferred the funds into his failing crypto exchange in a desperate attempt to show fake liquidity to his remaining investors. It was a textbook Ponzi maneuver. But the most damning piece of evidence was the timeline. The bankruptcy court records clearly stated that Brad Exchange had officially filed for Chapter 7 insolvency a full 30 days ago. 30 days. That meant for the past, Brad and Chloe had been walking around Atlanta, attending high society dinners and putting money in the church collection plate, all while knowing they were completely destitute. They had known for a month that they were losing their penthouse. And for that entire month, my parents, Vivian and Marcus, had been plotting to steal my newly purchased home to serve as a soft landing pad for their fraudulent son-in-law. They had forged my signature on that master lease agreement, knowing exactly what they were doing. They were trying to hide Brad from the federal bankruptcy trustees by moving his family into a house that could not be seized because it was legally owned by me. I sat back in my leather office chair and took a sip of my coffee. The digital paper trail was flawless. I downloaded every single PDF, every schedule of assets, and every creditor matrix. I saved them to a secure encrypted hard drive. Brad thought his white tears at the church altar would protect him from the consequences of his actions. Chloe thought she could guilt-trip me into financing their fake, luxurious lifestyle. My parents thought they could use the cover of religious piety to steal from both their mother and their daughter. They had severely underestimated the woman they were dealing with. I picked up my phone and called my private investigator. I told him I needed physical copies of the wire transfer authorizations from Big Mama Bank. I needed to see exactly whose signatures were on the withdrawal slips that approved the release of her $2 million. The community could call me a lost soul all they wanted. I was about to show them exactly what happens when you cross a forensic accountant who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The very next morning, a sharp knock at my front door echoed through the high ceilings of my new house. I checked the security cameras and saw a man holding a thick manila envelope. I opened the door and he handed me the papers with a rehearsed smile, confirming I had been officially served. I carried the heavy packet into my living room and sank into my leather armchair. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. I opened the envelope and pulled out a civil summons. Brad was actually suing me. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man was breathtaking. He had filed an emergency injunction and a civil lawsuit demanding $500,000 in damages for illegal eviction, emotional distress, and loss of prospective business revenue. The legal filing claimed that my refusal to honor the forged master lease had caused his tech startup to miss a critical funding milestone. I was weaponizing the court system, betting that a black woman facing a mountain of expensive legal paperwork would simply panic and settle out of court to avoid the financial drain. He relied on the assumption that I would be intimidated by his aggressive legal posturing. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and sat perfectly still in the quiet of my home. A normal person would have immediately dialed a real estate defense attorney. A normal person would have been terrified of losing their newly purchased property to a lengthy court battle. But I did not need a defense lawyer. You do not build a wall to protect yourself from a parasite. You cut off its blood supply. My laptop chimed with an encrypted email notification from my private investigator. The subject line read, Hattie Heritage Foundation, Wire authorizations. I opened the attached PDF file and began to follow the money. In forensic accounting, there is a saying that people lie but numbers never do. Brad had spun a beautiful tale for my parents and the church community about market downturns and temporary liquidity issues. The truth laid out in stark black and white on the banking documents was entirely different. The initial bankruptcy filing I found yesterday showed a $2 million deficit. But the comprehensive audit records my investigator pulled revealed a much darker reality. Brad had not just drained Big Mama Hattie primary retirement fund. He had also tapped into the escrow account attached to the historic commercial properties our family owned in downtown Atlanta. The total amount stolen was $2.5 million. Every single cent of the legacy my grandfather had built brick by brick during the civil rights era was gone. I traced the routing numbers across the global banking network. Brad had never used the money to fund a legitimate software company. There were no payroll records for developers, no server hosting fees, no patents filed. Instead, the $2.5 million was routed to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. From Delaware, it was wired to an offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. Within 48 hours of hitting the Caymans, the entire sum was dumped into an unregulated foreign cryptocurrency exchange. Brad had treated my family generational wealth like chips at a high-stakes casino. When the digital coin market collapsed overnight, his portfolio was instantly wiped out. Howe was not a visionary entrepreneur. He was a degenerate gambler with a good haircut and a rehearsed elevator pitch. For years, Brad had strutted around our Sunday dinners swirling expensive bourbon talking over me whenever I discussed the stock market. He loved using buzzwords like blockchain scalability and decentralized finance to make himself sound like the smartest person in the room. My parents ate it up. They treated him with a level of deference and respect they never extended to their own daughter. They were so blinded by their desire to boast about their white tech bro son-in-law that they never bothered to ask for a single quarterly earnings report. But the most devastating part of the file was not where the money went. It was how it got out of the bank in the first place. I zoomed in on the authorization signatures printed at the bottom of the wire transfer slips. 2 years ago, my parents, Vivian and Marcus, had quietly moved Big Mama Hattie into a luxury assisted living facility. They told the entire extended family that her memory was failing and she needed specialized care for early-stage dementia. Using her medical diagnosis as leverage, they secured a limited financial conservatorship over her estate. They claimed it was to protect her assets from scammers. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The signatures approving the release of the $2.5 million belonged to Vivian and Marcus. My own parents had authorized the systematic looting of their mother life savings. They had willingly handed over the keys to the vault because Brad convinced them he could triple the money and make them the wealthiest family in the congregation. They risked everything on his empty promises and lost it all. My phone lit up on the desk, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Vivian. She did not bother asking how I was doing after the public humiliation at church. She launched straight into a barrage of demands. "Nay, you have pushed your brother-in-law too far." Vivian's voice was frantic and demanding. "The lawsuit is just a formality to protect his rights. If you just sign the deed of the house over to a family trust managed by Brad, he will call off his lawyers. He needs the equity in that house to secure a commercial bridge loan. He is going to bounce back and repay everything, but he needs physical collateral today. Stop being so stubborn and do what is right for this family." The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped into place. I stood up from my chair, pacing the length of my living room. They did not just want a free place to live. They were not just trying to avoid the embarrassment of being homeless. They needed my house because it was completely paid off. It was a pristine, unencumbered asset. They intended to use my 5-bedroom home as collateral to take out a massive multi-million-dollar mortgage. They desperately needed that cash to replace the missing $2.5 million in Big Mama Trust Fund before the mandatory annual conservatorship audit took place next month. If the state auditors discovered the money was missing, Vivian and Marcus would face federal prison time for elder financial abuse. They were trying to steal my house to cover up their own felony crimes. I did not yell at my mother. I kept my voice terrifyingly calm. I told her I would think about the family trust and hung up the phone. I needed to move fast. Vivian and Marcus had justified locking Big Mama Hattie away by claiming she was losing her mind. But if they were capable of forging a lease agreement and draining her accounts, maybe her medical diagnosis was just another one of their calculated lies. If they were willing to sacrifice my future to save themselves, what exactly had they done to my grandmother? I grabbed my car keys and my designer handbag. I did not need to fight Brad in civil court. I needed to cut the head off the snake. It was time to pay a surprise visit to the Golden Oaks Assisted Living Facility. I was going to find out exactly how much memory Big Mama Hattie had actually lost. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car as I merged onto the interstate, heading straight for the Golden Oaks Assisted Living Facility. The rain had finally stopped, but the heavy Atlanta humidity pressed against my windshield. My car dashboard lit up with an incoming call. The display read Vivian. My mother was not someone who accepted silence. She was the type of woman who believed that if she yelled long enough and loud enough, reality would simply bend to her will. I tapped the screen to answer, keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. "Nay, you listen to me right now," Vivian demanded, her voice shrill and vibrating with panic. "I am not playing games with you anymore. Brad lawyers are drafting the final paperwork for the injunction. If you do not hand over the keys to that property by tonight, he is going to take you for everything you have. You are destroying your sister marriage." I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the precise, calculated tone I used when interrogating hostile witnesses during corporate audits. "I know about the Delaware Shell Corporation, Vivian. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know exactly how Brad wiped out $2.5 million in a span of 48 hours. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For 5 long seconds, the only sound was the hum of my car engine. When Vivian finally spoke, her voice had lost its commanding edge. It was replaced by a breathless, trembling whisper. "You hacked into his business accounts. You have no right to look at private family finances." "I did not hack anything," I replied coldly. "Federal bankruptcy courts are public record for anyone who knows how to read. What I want to know is how a man with no liquid assets managed to get his hands on $2.5 million. Big Mama Trust Fund only had about $800,000 in cash reserves. Where did you and Marcus get the rest of the money to feed Brad gambling addiction?" Vivian let out a sharp, ragged sob. She realized she was trapped. She realized her quiet, obedient daughter had just ripped the floorboards out from under her entire operation. "It was an investment," Nia Vivian cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "Brad is a genius. He had inside information on a new blockchain protocol. He just needed a large capital injection to secure the development rights. We were trying to build generational wealth for the family. We were trying to make sure Chloe and the children never had to worry about money again." "You did not answer my question, Vivian. Where did the rest of the money come from?" My mother took a shaky breath. "We leveraged the Cascade Heights estate. We took out a commercial mortgage on the property." My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The Cascade Heights estate was the crown jewel of our family lineage. It was a sprawling historic property that my grandfather had bought in cash during the height of the civil rights movement. He had worked 3 jobs and fought against aggressive redlining practices just to secure a piece of land where a black family could live in peace. He had paid off that land with blood, sweat, and unyielding determination. The property had been free and clear of any bank liens for over 40 years, and my parents had secretly mortgaged it to hand the cash to a mediocre white man with a startup pitch. "You put a mortgage on Big Mama House?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You handed our grandfather legacy to a bank so Brad could play cryptocurrency trader in the Caribbean." "We had to do it," Vivian pleaded. "You do not understand how the business world works, Nia. Brad has connections we do not have. He moves in circles that can elevate this entire family. When he walked into a bank, they treated him with respect. They listened to his projections. We needed a white face at the front of the company to secure the kind of funding that would take us to the next level. We thought he was going to triple the investment. We thought we would pay off the mortgage in 6 months and keep the profits." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You sold out your own mother because you were blinded by the illusion of white proximity." You let Brad parade around our Sunday dinners swirling expensive bourbon and talking over me whenever I discussed real financial markets. You completely ignored the fact that your own daughter is a licensed forensic auditor because you were so desperate to show off a tech entrepreneur's son-in-law to your church friends. You handed him the keys to the kingdom because he wore a Patagonia vest and threw around buzzwords you did not even understand. He promised us a massive return, Vivian screamed, dropping the victim act completely. And he would have delivered if the market had not crashed. It was a fluke, an economic anomaly. Brad is putting together a recovery plan right now. He has a new venture mapped out, but his credit is temporarily frozen because of the bankruptcy filing. No commercial lender will touch him without clean collateral. That is when the true horrific nature of their plan finally clicked into place. They were not just forging a lease agreement to give Chloe and Brad a free place to sleep. A place to sleep did not solve a $2 million deficit. You need my house. I stated the reality washing over me like ice water. You need my 5-bedroom fully paid off estate. The bank issued a notice of default on the Cascade Heights property on Monday. Vivian confessed her words, spilling out in a frantic rush. We are 30 days away from full foreclosure. If the state conducts the annual conservatorship audit and sees the house is gone and the cash is missing, your father and I will go to federal prison. We need your house, Nia. It is a pristine asset. There are no liens on it. If you sign the deed over to Brad New Holding Company, he can use it to secure a commercial bridge loan. He can get enough cash to pay off the defaulted mortgage on Big Mama House and get us out of this mess. I drove in silence, letting her absolute delusion fill the space between us. My own mother was demanding that I sign away the biggest achievement of my life. She wanted me to hand over the house I had worked 80-hour weeks to buy so that her fraudulent son-in-law could take out a second mortgage on it. They were fully prepared to leave me bankrupt and homeless just to cover their tracks and keep Brad out of jail. You have to do this, Nia, Vivian demanded, sensing my silence. You owe this family. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. If you do not sign that property over to Brad by tonight, your father and I are going to lose everything. You will be responsible for sending your own parents to prison. I am not responsible for your greed, Vivian. I am not responsible for your utter stupidity. And I am certainly not signing over my property to fund Brad's next scam. I hit the button on my steering wheel and terminated the call. I did not block her number. I wanted a detailed log of every frantic, threatening text message she was about to send. Every digital footprint was another nail in her coffin. 10 minutes later, I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Golden Oaks Assisted Living Facility. It was a gilded cage designed for the ultra-wealthy. The landscaping was immaculate, the security was tight, and the monthly fees were astronomical. Vivian and Marcus had chosen this place specifically because it looked like a luxury resort, making it easier to convince the extended family that Big Mama Hattie was receiving the best possible care for her supposedly failing mind. I parked my car and strode through the sliding glass doors into the main lobby. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, and classical music played softly through hidden speakers. The receptionist, a young woman in crisp medical scrubs, looked up from her computer and offered a polite customer service smile. Welcome to Golden Oaks. How can I help you today? I am here to see Hattie. Room 412. I said, not breaking my stride as I headed for the elevators. The receptionist stood up quickly, reaching for her phone. Excuse me, Mom. I need to check the visitor registry. The primary conservators have requested that all visits be pre-approved due to the patient declining cognitive state. I stopped and turned to face her, pulling my federal auditor identification badge from my handbag and holding it up. I am a licensed forensic investigator conducting a financial wellness check on behalf of the estate. If you attempt to restrict my access to an elderly patient, you will be named as an accessory in a federal elder abuse investigation. Do you want to make that phone call, or do you want to sit down? The receptionist swallowed hard, her eyes darting from my badge to my face. She slowly lowered the phone and sank back into her chair. I turned around and stepped into the elevator, hitting the button for the 4th floor. My parents had built their entire criminal enterprise on the foundation of Big Mama Hattie diagnosis. They had silenced a fierce, independent matriarch by convincing the world she could no longer remember her own name. But I knew my grandmother. I knew the woman who had survived the Jim Crow South and built a real estate empire with nothing but grit and unmatched intelligence. I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway until I reached the heavy oak door of room 412. I did not knock. I simply turned the handle and pushed the door open. It was time to see exactly what kind of game my grandmother was playing. The heavy oak door of room 412 swung open silently. I stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was the oppressive manufactured warmth of the room. It smelled like lavender air freshener and sterile clinical sheets. The curtains were drawn half shut, blocking out the vibrant Atlanta afternoon. In the corner of the suite, sitting in a plush motorized recliner, was the woman who had built our family empire. Big Mama Hattie was staring blankly at a flat-screen television mounted on the wall. A loud, obnoxious daytime game show blared from the speakers, filling the room with artificial cheering and flashing neon lights. She was wearing a faded floral housecoat, her silver hair tucked under a silk bonnet. A knit blanket was draped over her lap. She looked fragile. She looked exactly like the helpless, deteriorating old woman my parents had described to the entire congregation. I closed the door behind me and walked slowly across the thick carpet. My heart felt heavy in my chest. I had come here to cut off the snake at the head, but looking at my grandmother, I suddenly felt sick. How was I supposed to look this proud matriarch in the eye and tell her that her own son and daughter had robbed her blind? How do you explain to a woman with early-stage dementia that the land she fought for during the civil rights movement had been mortgaged to feed a crypto scam? I knelt beside her chair and placed my hand gently over hers. Her skin was soft and paper-thin. "Big Mama," I said, keeping my voice low and soothing the way you speak to a frightened child. "It is Nia. I am here. We need to talk about Marcus and Vivian. Something bad has happened with the house." She did not turn her head. Her eyes remained locked on the spinning prize wheel on the television screen. Her breathing was slow and shallow. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump forming in my throat. I squeezed her hand, trying to figure out the gentlest way to break the news of a $2.5 million theft. Then something extraordinary happened. The frail hand under mine suddenly flipped over and gripped my wrist with the crushing strength of a woman half her age. Big Mama reached into the pocket of her floral housecoat with her free hand, pulled out the television remote, and hit the mute button. The obnoxious game show cheering instantly vanished, leaving the room in a ringing silence. She slowly turned her head. The blank, vacant stare she had been holding just seconds ago completely evaporated. Her dark eyes were sharp, clear, and burning with a terrifying, intense clarity. "You actually think this old woman is truly senile, Nia?" Big Mama spoke, her voice stripped of any frailty. It was rich, commanding, and dripping with Southern authority. I froze, my knees still resting on the carpet. I could not form a single word. Big Mama let go of my wrist and sat up perfectly straight in her recliner, throwing the knit blanket off her lap. "I let them think I am crazy, Nia. I played their little game to see exactly how those vultures planned to divide this carcass before my body was even cold. Do I look like a woman who forgets her own bank account numbers?" I pushed myself up off the floor, staring at her in absolute shock. "You do not have dementia." She let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. "Dementia. Vivian brought some high-priced boutique doctor in here 6 months ago. A man who gets paid under the table to write whatever diagnosis his wealthy clients request. They wanted a medical excuse to lock me away and secure that conservatorship. If I had fought them in open court, they would have dragged out the competency hearings for years, draining the estate with legal fees. I built my fortune by knowing when to fold a bad hand. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I gave them a helpless old lady with a broken mind, and then I sat back and watched them hang themselves with their own greed. My mind raced, processing the absolute genius of her survival strategy. She had turned herself into a Trojan horse right inside their criminal operation. But the reality of the situation still hung heavily in the air. "Big Mama," I started, pulling my chair closer to her. "They did hang themselves, but they took your money with them. Brad's startup went bankrupt. Vivian and Marcus signed off on a $2.5 million wire transfer. They mortgaged the Cascade Heights estate. The bank issued a notice of default on Monday. You have 30 days before they foreclose on the property. Big Mama did not gasp. She did not cry. She simply nodded slowly, a dark, dangerous smile spreading across her face. I know they did. I have known about that mediocre white boy and his fake tech company from the moment Marcus brought him to Sunday dinner. They paraded him around my living room, expecting me to bow down because he wore a designer watch and spoke quickly. I built an empire in this city when men who looked like him would not even let me use the front door of the bank. I knew he was a fraud the second he shook my hand. But they forged my signature to steal my house, Big Mama, I urged. They tried to attach a 10-year master lease to my property to hide Brad from the bankruptcy courts. They want to force me to sign my deed over so Brad can secure a commercial bridge loan to pay off your mortgage before the state auditors find out what they did. Big Mama let out a deep, rumbling laugh that echoed off the sterile walls of the facility. They tried to steal your house to cover up the theft of my house. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of those two. They always underestimated you, Nia. They thought you were just the quiet girl in the basement playing with numbers. They forgot that you have my blood running through your veins. She stood up from the recliner, moving with perfect balance, and walked over to the hospital bed in the corner of the room. She reached her hand under the heavy mattress, feeling around for a specific spot. Vivian thinks she is so smart, Big Mama said, pulling her arm back out. She confiscated my cell phone and my checkbooks. She told the front desk not to let any of my old friends visit me without her written permission. She thought she cut off all my supply lines. But your grandmother did not survive the real estate market in the 70s without keeping a few backdoor channels open. She turned around and held out her hand. Resting in her palm was a small encrypted external hard drive. I have a friend on the board of directors at the regional bank, Big Mama explained. We go way back. When Vivian and Marcus presented that conservatorship paperwork, he knew something was wrong. Legally, he had to comply with the court order, but unofficially, he has been pulling every single internal routing document authorization slip and digital signature log involving my trust fund. He smuggled this drive to me hidden inside a box of sugar-free cookies last week. I stared at the silver hard drive. It was the holy grail of financial evidence. It was the absolute undeniable proof required to bypass a civil dispute and go straight for a federal criminal indictment. Everything is on here, Big Mama said, stepping forward and pressing the cold metal drive into the palm of my hand. The original wire transfers. The fraudulent mortgage application. Marcus filed using inflated income projections. The digital footprints of Brad routing the cash to the Cayman Islands. It is the entire map of their criminal enterprise. I closed my fingers tightly around the drive. A surge of pure adrenaline rushed through my system. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer just scattered clues. We had the complete picture, and we had the weapon to destroy them. What do we do now? I asked, looking into the eyes of the woman who had just handed me the keys to our family's salvation. Big Mama walked back to her recliner and sat down, smoothing out the wrinkles in her floral housecoat. She picked up the television remote, her eyes flashing with a calculating, predatory brilliance. We do not just stop them, Nia. We make an example out of them. We let them keep digging their own graves right up until the moment they think they have won. We smile. We nod. We let them plan their grand victory. And then we burn their entire world to the ground in front of everyone they care about. I slipped the hard drive into my designer bag, snapping the clasp shut. The alliance was forged. 2 generations of Black women, written off and underestimated by their own family, were about to orchestrate the most devastating financial execution the city of Atlanta had ever seen. The prey was officially locked in our sights. All we needed now was the perfect stage to spring the trap. I left Golden Oaks with the encrypted hard drive, burning a hole in my designer bag, and drove straight back to my house. I poured myself a generous glass of robust red wine and stood at the edge of my kitchen island, looking down at the small silver device. It held the entire blueprint of my family betrayal. Before I had left her room, Big Mama Hattie had laid out the strategy with the precision of a military general. She told me that striking now would only give Vivian and Marcus time to scramble. They would hire expensive defense attorneys and spin the narrative behind closed doors. They would claim it was a misunderstanding and quietly settle the debt by selling off remaining assets. Big Mama refused to let them hide in the shadows. She wanted maximum casualties. Her 85th birthday gala was exactly 14 days away. My parents had booked the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton and invited half the city. The guest list included local politicians, mega-church pastors, and the Atlanta Black elite. Vivian wanted to use the gala to officially announce her absolute control over the family trust and present Brad as the brilliant financial manager of our legacy. Big Mama looked me dead in the eye and said, "We are going to let them build their beautiful glass castle on that stage, and then we are going to throw a brick right through the center of it." While I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my home, cross-referencing the offshore wire transfers with the bankruptcy filings, the digital world outside was burning. My phone vibrated endlessly on the marble counter. Brad had decided to escalate his campaign of manipulation. Since he could not intimidate me in person, he weaponized the internet. He posted a highly produced video on his social media accounts. He filmed himself sitting on the edge of a cheap motel bed, looking appropriately disheveled with terrible lighting. He spoke directly into the camera, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. He told his thousands of followers that his startup had hit a minor temporary roadblock. He claimed he humbly asked his wealthy single sister-in-law for a few weeks of shelter to keep a roof over his beautiful children. Then he let a single tear roll down his cheek and said, "I locked him out in the rain because I harbored a deep-seated resentment against a white man marrying into a prominent black family." He spun a narrative of reverse racism and victimhood that hit the internet algorithms perfectly. The video went viral within the Atlanta church community and local tech circles. My notifications flooded with vitriol from strangers and people I had known my entire life. Deacon Hayes shared the video with a caption about praying for my hardened heart. Women from the church choir left comments calling me a disgrace to the community. They branded me an angry, bitter black woman who was punishing a devoted father out of pure spite. Brad knew exactly what he was doing. I knew society would rush to comfort a crying white man and vilify an independent black woman who refused to bow to his entitlement. He played the ultimate victim card to mask his catastrophic failures. Right on cue, Chloe played her part as the suffering wife. My text messages lit up with a barrage of photos from my sister. She sent pictures of my nieces and nephews eating instant noodles on a plastic folding table. She sent an image of her youngest daughter sleeping on a deflated air mattress. Her messages were frantic and dripping with emotional blackmail. She typed that Brad was having severe panic attacks because of my cruelty. She said they were drowning in poverty while I selfishly hoarded a 5-bedroom mansion. She demanded to know how I could sleep at night, knowing my own flesh and blood was starving in the streets. She called me a monster who cared more about property values than family loyalty. I took a slow sip of my wine, looking down at the text messages. Then I glanced back at the dual monitors of my workstation. The data I had just decrypted from Big Mama hard drive told a completely different story. I pulled up the secret credit card statements attached to Vivian's account. The same account Vivian was letting Brad use to survive. There were no charges for cheap motels or instant noodles. Just 3 hours before Chloe sent me that picture of the air mattress, Brad had swiped that card at an exclusive boutique in Buckhead. He had dropped $4,000 on a custom-tailored Italian suit and matching leather shoes. Chloe had spent $800 at a high-end salon earlier that morning. They were not starving. They were meticulously staging poverty for the cameras while quietly preparing to look like royalty for the upcoming gala. The sheer audacity of their performance fueled my focus. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I felt a cold, surgical precision taking over my mind. I was a forensic accountant. I did not operate on emotions. I operated on documented facts. I spent the next 48 hours compiling the ultimate dossier. I mapped out every single fraudulent transaction. I created clean color-coded flowcharts showing exactly how the $2.5 million moved from Big Mama retirement account into the Delaware Shell Corporation and finally into the unregulated crypto exchange in the Cayman Islands. I matched the timestamps of the wire transfers to the exact dates my parents filed the conservatorship papers. I documented how Brad funneled the remaining stolen funds to pay for his luxury car leases and Chloe diamond jewelry just days before the market crashed. It was a masterpiece of financial tracking. Every lie they told online was contradicted by irrefutable federal banking records. My phone buzzed again with another message from Chloe. This one was venomous. She told me that God was going to judge me for turning my back on family. She said that Vivian and Marcus had completely written me out of the family narrative and that I would be entirely alone for the rest of my life. She ended the text by saying Brad was going to be named the official head of the family trust at the birthday gala, and once he had legal control, they would make sure I never saw a single dime of the estate. She boasted that my refusal to give them my house would not matter because Brad was about to control an empire. I set my wine glass down on the counter. The trap was set. The bait was laid out perfectly, and the prey was blindly walking right into the snare with their heads held high. They actually believed their own lies. They believed their social standing would shield them from federal laws. I picked up my phone to send my one and only reply to my sister. I did not defend myself. I did not mention the fake air mattress or the offshore bank accounts. I did not care about the opinions of people on social media who could not read a balance sheet. I simply typed a single response and hit send. Make sure you wear your absolute best dress to Big Mama, 85th birthday gala next week. Tell Brad to wear his brand new tailored Italian suit. I have a massive surprise gift waiting for him. I sat in the corner office of my firm, reviewing a multi-million-dollar embezzlement case for a corporate client. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my office gave me a perfect view of the sleek reception area. That was how I saw the storm brewing before it even hit my door. Vivian and Marcus marched past my receptionist, completely ignoring the strict security protocols of a federal auditing firm. My mother wore her Sunday best on a Tuesday afternoon, clearly dressed to intimidate my staff. My father trailed behind her, looking like a thundercloud ready to burst. I did not stand up when they threw open my glass door. I simply hit save on my spreadsheet and folded my hands deliberately on my desk. Vivian marched straight to my desk and slammed a thick gold-embossed envelope onto the glass. It slid and stopped right next to my coffee mug. It was the official invitation to Big Mama Hattie 85th birthday gala at the Ritz-Carlton. Vivian leaned over the desk, her voice a venomous whisper designed to carry just enough to humiliate me, but not enough to alert the entire floor. You are going to attend this gala, Nia. And when you walk into that ballroom, you are going to walk straight up to Brad and hand him the keys to the property. You are going to apologize for your embarrassing behavior, and you are going to sign the deed over to his new holding company. Marcus stepped up beside her, crossing his arms over his chest. He used his deep, authoritative voice, the exact tone that made the congregation tremble on Sunday mornings. If you do not hand over that house by the time they serve the champagne, we are done playing games. I have already spoken to Pastor Miller. If you refuse to support your sister and her husband, the pastor will call you out by name from the pulpit this Sunday. He will announce your formal excommunication from the church. You will be completely cut off from the community. No one will do business with you. No one will speak to you. You will be entirely erased from our family history. I looked at the two people who brought me into this world. They were willing to use the sacred space of our church to destroy my life, all to protect a white man who had literally stolen my grandmother retirement fund. They cared more about maintaining the illusion of a wealthy, successful son-in-law than they cared about the daughter sitting right in front of them who had actually built real wealth. To them, being shamed in front of the congregation was the ultimate weapon. They thought the fear of social exile would force me into submission. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and looked at my mother with absolute detachment. You are threatening to disown me over a house that does not belong to you, Vivian. You are willing to leverage God and the church to force me into financing a crypto scammer. Vivian slammed her hand on the glass. Brad is not a scammer. He is a visionary experiencing a temporary liquidity crisis. He is giving this family a seat at the table in the tech industry. You are just a bitter single woman who cannot stand to see your sister elevated. Right at that moment, a notification chimed on my computer screen. A new email had arrived in my personal inbox. The sender was Brad. The subject line read, "A mutually beneficial solution." I clicked open the email, keeping my eyes on the screen while my parents continued to rant about family loyalty and spiritual duty. Brad had the absolute unmitigated audacity to write to me like he was a billionaire offering a charity handout to a peasant. The email read, Nia, I am willing to forgive your aggressive ignorance regarding real estate law and family duty. I understand that as a woman working a standard 9-to-5 job, you do not comprehend high-level corporate restructuring. If you drop this ridiculous resistance and transfer the deed of the house to my new venture capital firm tonight, I will generously grant you a 5% non-voting equity stake in my next startup. This is your one and only chance to be part of something bigger than your little accounting job. Do not make me destroy you in civil court. I read the words twice to ensure my eyes were not playing tricks on me. A man who was secretly drowning in federal bankruptcy, who had just wiped out $2.5 million of stolen funds, was offering me 5% of absolute nothing in exchange for a pristine multi-million-dollar estate, and he was packaging it as a favor. I was dripping with so much unearned privilege and racial arrogance that he genuinely believed a seasoned forensic auditor would fall for a fake equity scam just because he used words like venture capital and corporate restructuring. I looked up from my monitor. My parents were still standing there waiting for me to break under the weight of their religious blackmail. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that made Marcus take a slight step back. I picked up the gold-embossed invitation from my desk and ran my thumb over the lettering. I will be at the gala, I said smoothly. And I promise you, Vivian, I will give Brad exactly what he deserves in front of every single guest. Vivian's face relaxed into a triumphant smirk. She thought she had won. She thought the threat of public shame had finally broken my spirit. See, Marcus, she said, turning to my father. I told you she would eventually remember her place. They turned and walked out of my office, their heads held high, completely unaware that they were marching straight toward their own execution. The moment the glass door clicked shut, I hit the print icon on my computer. The office printer hummed and spit out a crisp physical copy of Brad's email. It was a written, documented attempt to extort real property using a fraudulent corporate entity. He had transmitted it across state lines using an email server which officially made it a federal offense. It was the final nail in his coffin. I took a thick manila envelope from my drawer and slid the printed email inside. I grabbed a thick black marker and wrote 2 words across the front of the envelope: federal evidence. I placed the envelope into my designer leather briefcase, grabbed my car keys, and walked out of my office. The corporate battlefield was set. The trap was fully loaded. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage, a sense of absolute calm washing over me. It was time to go shopping for a gala dress. After all, if you are going to burn your entire toxic family to the ground, you might as well look flawless doing it. I did not go to a boutique first. I drove straight back to my secure home office and locked the doors. The shopping could wait, because the real preparation required absolute digital precision. I sat at my mahogany desk, the glow of the dual monitors illuminating my face in the darkened room. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling the printed email from Brad out of my briefcase and placing it next to the encrypted hard drive Big Mama had given me. I opened a new secure file on my encrypted server and began to merge the data. Forensic accounting is not just about finding missing money. It is about telling a story with undeniable mathematical facts. Brad thought he was playing a game of family manipulation, relying on his white privilege to dazzle my parents into submission. He thought his arrogant startup vocabulary made him untouchable, but his arrogance had blinded him to the actual federal laws he was breaking. By sending that email offering me fake equity for a multi-million-dollar estate, he committed extortion. But the real kill shot, the one that would ensure he never saw the outside of a prison cell for a very long time, was the wire transfers. I pulled up the bank statements showing the exact route of Big Mama, $2.5 million. I traced every single digital footprint. Brad had authorized the transfer from a prominent commercial bank right here in Georgia. He routed it through a dummy shell corporation he had registered in Delaware, using a registered agent service to hide his name. And finally, he landed the money in an unregulated offshore crypto exchange down in the Cayman Islands. He probably thought moving the money offshore made his theft invisible to local authorities. He was incredibly wrong. When you steal money from your wife grandmother, it is a tragic family dispute. When you manipulate conservatorship documents to steal money from a legally conserved elderly woman, it becomes elder financial abuse. But the exact moment you push a button and wire those stolen funds across state lines and international borders, you cross a massive invisible tripwire. You upgrade your crime from a local police matter to a federal felony. Brad had committed federal wire fraud. I had engaged in money laundering. The minimum sentencing guidelines for that level of financial crime, coupled with the exploitation of a vulnerable senior citizen, would put him in a federal penitentiary for decades. I compiled every single piece of evidence with ruthless efficiency. I attached the forged master lease agreement they had tried to attach to my property. I included the fraudulent commercial mortgage application Vivian and Marcus had filed against the historic Cascade Heights estate, proving they had lied about their income and the property intended use. I added the Chapter 7 bankruptcy filings, proving Brad had zero liquid assets and was actively hiding his financial ruin from his creditors. And I placed the offshore routing numbers proving exactly where Big Mama Retirement Fund went to die. I organized everything into clear chronological folders. I added color-coded flowcharts and an executive summary, because federal prosecutors love a case that is already wrapped up with a neat little bow. I did their jobs for them, leaving absolutely zero room for reasonable doubt. I transferred the entire massive dossier onto a clean encrypted flash drive. I placed the drive inside a heavy manila envelope along with a printed cover letter. The letter was strictly anonymous but highly specific. I detailed the exact federal statutes Brad had violated. I highlighted the offshore accounts and the exact timestamps of the wire transfers. And most importantly, I emphasized the immediate flight risk. I pointed out that Brad was a desperate man with a bankrupt company facing imminent foreclosure and eviction from his secret short-term rental. A man in that position with established ties to offshore cryptocurrency exchanges is a man preparing to run the moment he feels the heat. I sealed the heavy envelope, grabbed my car keys, and drove to a post office 2 towns over just to be safe. I paid in cash and shipped the package via priority overnight delivery directly to the white-collar crime division of the FBI Atlanta field office. The bait was in the water. The trap was locked and loaded. Now I just had to wait for the federal government to take a bite. The next few days passed in a blur of meticulous preparation and silent anticipation. I finally bought my dress for the gala. It was a floor-length emerald green gown that fit like a second skin. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she is about to command a room and leave no survivors. My phone continued to buzz relentlessly with passive-aggressive text messages from Chloe and Vivian. They kept reminding me not to embarrass the family on Saturday night. They demanded I bring the house keys in a nice gift box for Brad. I ignored every single one of them, channeling all my energy into the upcoming performance. Friday afternoon arrived, the day before Big Mama's 85th birthday gala. The tension in my chest was a tight coiled spring ready to snap. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a cup of hot chamomile tea and reviewing the speech I planned to give at the event. My burner phone, the secure, untraceable line I had included in the anonymous FBI packet, suddenly vibrated on the cold marble counter. I stared at the screen. The caller ID was completely blocked. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart rate, and answered the call. The voice on the other end was clipped professional and carried the distinct heavy authority of federal law enforcement. The caller identified himself as Special Agent Reynolds from the Atlanta field office. He did not ask for my name, and I did not offer it. He simply stated that his division had received a highly compelling package of financial documents regarding an ongoing investigation into financial fraud. He said their internal forensic team had verified the routing numbers, the bankruptcy filings, and the offshore transfers. Then he asked me a very specific, vital question. He wanted to know if the primary suspect, Bradley, was planning to attend the high-profile social event scheduled for tomorrow evening at the Ritz-Carlton. I kept my voice perfectly steady, projecting absolute calm. I told him that the suspect was not only attending but was scheduled to be officially appointed as the head of a massive family trust during the main presentation in front of hundreds of witnesses. I warned the agent that once the suspect realized the family assets were actually locked down and his plan had failed, he would likely panic and attempt to flee the jurisdiction immediately. Special Agent Reynolds was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the faint rhythmic sound of typing in the background. Then he gave me exactly what I needed to hear. He told me that the agency does not typically operate on the schedule of private social events. But given the staggering amount of money stolen from a vulnerable elderly victim, the concrete evidence of federal wire fraud, and the highly credible flight risk, they were accelerating their timeline. He confirmed that a federal arrest warrant was being expedited through a federal judge right at that very moment. Before he hung up, Special Agent Reynolds gave me one final directive. He sent a text message to the secure number just to ensure the instructions were perfectly clear and documented. My burner phone screen lit up with the incoming message. I read the words and a cold, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. The text read, "We will be at the event in plain clothes. Do not let him leave the hall." I locked my phone and set it down next to my emerald green gown. The federal government was coming to Big Mama birthday party. Vivian and Marcus wanted a spectacular show for the Atlanta Black elite. They wanted to parade their white son-in-law around like a trophy. I was about to deliver a blockbuster performance they would never forget. I stepped out of my car and handed my keys to the valet at the Ritz-Carlton. The heavy Atlanta humidity clung to my emerald green gown as I walked through the towering glass doors. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in stolen luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 200 of the most prominent elite in the city. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos floated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of imported champagne and caviar. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner. To anyone else, it looked like a beautiful celebration of generational black wealth. But I was a forensic accountant. I did not see a party. I saw a crime scene. Every silk drape, every floral arrangement, and every drop of liquor was a line item paid for by a stolen retirement fund. I stood near the entrance, taking in the sheer audacity of my family. My father, Marcus, was holding court by a massive ice sculpture, holding a glass of scotch, and laughing loudly with a group of city councilmen. He was wearing a custom velvet dinner jacket that screamed new money. My mother, Vivian, was working the room like a politician running for office. She wore a beaded gown that easily cost $10,000. But the real spectacle was Chloe and Brad. Brad was standing near the center of the room, surrounded by senior deacons from our church and several local business owners. He was wearing the exact Italian tailored suit I had tracked on Vivian credit card statement just a few days ago. He had one hand in his pocket and the other gesturing wildly as he talked about decentralized finance and market disruption. He was playing the brilliant white tech founder, saving the wealthy black family, and the crowd was eating out of the palm of his hand. Chloe stood next to him, sipping champagne and flashing a blinding practice smile. Around her neck sat a massive diamond tennis necklace. My stomach tightened. I recognized those diamonds immediately. They belonged to Big Mama Hattie. Chloe had actually raided her grandmother's jewelry box while the woman was locked away in a nursing home. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and took a slow, deliberate sip. I scanned the perimeter of the ballroom, looking past the glamorous guests. Standing near the velvet-draped exit doors was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a nondescript gray suit. He was not drinking. He was not talking to anyone. He was just watching Brad with the predatory stillness of a hunter. Special Agent Reynolds was right on time. Before I could even take a second step into the room, a hand clamped down hard on my upper arm. Long, manicured acrylic nails dug painfully into my bare skin. I turned and found Vivian glaring at me. Her picture-perfect smile remained plastered on her face for the sake of the guests watching us, but her eyes were entirely black with rage. She did not bother with a greeting. She yanked my arm and dragged me behind a massive, cascading floral arrangement completely out of sight from the main floor. "Where is the envelope, Nia?" she demanded, her voice a venomous hiss. "Tell me you brought the signed deed and the keys to the house." I smoothly removed my arm from her grip and brushed out the silk of my dress. "Good evening to you too, Vivian. The ballroom looks absolutely exquisite. How exactly did you afford the deposit on a bankrupt credit limit?" "Do not play games with me tonight," Vivian snapped, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive gin on her breath. "Brad, future investors are in that room. The pastor is in that room. The entire foundation board is watching us right now. You are going to fix the massive embarrassment you caused this family. Chloe suddenly appeared, slipping behind the floral arrangement to join the ambush. She touched her stolen diamond necklace, nervously acting as if she were the victim. You better have brought those keys, Nia. Brad has been an absolute wreck all week because of your stubbornness. He needs to show his new venture capital partners that he has solid real estate collateral tonight. If you ruin this funding round for him, I swear I will never let you see your nieces and nephews again. I looked at my sister. The entitlement radiating from her was suffocating. You are wearing Big Mama diamonds, Chloe. Did you ask her permission, or did you just take them off her dresser when you forced her into that facility? Chloe flushed a deep, angry red. Big Mama wanted me to have them. She is not in her right mind anyway, and they go perfectly with my dress. Stop deflecting and stop being so selfish, Nia. Just give me the keys to the house so Brad can relax. Vivian stepped between us, pointing a rigid finger directly at my chest. Listen to me very carefully. In exactly 20 minutes, your father and I are going on that stage to officially announce our permanent legal conservatorship over your grandmother. We are going to announce that Brad is taking over as the sole managing director of the Hattie Heritage Foundation. When we finish, Marcus is going to call you up to the microphone. She leaned in so close I could feel the heat of her anger radiating off her skin. When you get on that stage, you are going to smile. You are going to publicly apologize to Brad for your ridiculous aggressive behavior this week. You are going to tell the entire congregation that you are gifting the deed of your new house to his venture capital firm as a symbol of family unity and absolute faith in his vision. You will hand him the keys in front of the photographers. I stared at the two women standing in front of me. They were completely disconnected from reality. They had built a massive house of cards on a foundation of felony fraud, and they genuinely believed that public pressure would force me to hold it up for them. They thought if they put a microphone in my hand and a spotlight on my face, I would surrender my entire life savings just to keep up appearances for people who did not even care about me. They thought my fear of making a scene was stronger than my self-respect, and if I refused, I asked my voice a flat, terrifying calm. What exactly is your backup plan, Vivian? Vivian's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. If you embarrass this family tonight, I will have Pastor Miller take the microphone. He will announce to every prominent black family in Atlanta that you have been completely cut off. He will tell them you are a bitter, greedy woman who turned her back on her own blood to hoard your wealth. You will never get another corporate audit contract in this city. You will be an absolute pariah. I looked past my mother's shoulder. Through the gap in the white roses, I could see the plainclothes FBI agent slowly moving closer to the stage, analyzing the exits and tapping his earpiece. The federal net was closing in tight, and my family was busy arguing about who got to steer the sinking ship. I promise you, Vivian, I said softly, looking directly into her cold eyes. I have no intention of ruining the show. I brought exactly what Brad deserves. Chloe let out a loud breath of relief and adjusted her stolen diamonds again. Finally. Was it really that hard to just be a supportive sister for once? Just make sure you do not stutter when you hand him the keys. He needs to look authoritative in front of his investors. Right on cue, the massive crystal chandeliers above us flickered and then dimmed to a soft atmospheric glow. A single bright spotlight hit the center of the main stage. The low hum of the jazz band faded out completely, and the guests began to murmur excitedly, taking their seats at the silk-draped tables. The ceremony was officially beginning. Vivian smoothed down the front of her beaded gown and lifted her chin, putting her mask of wealthy perfection back firmly into place. "Do not mess this up, Nia," she whispered, walking past me toward the front row VIP tables. Chloe followed close behind her, shooting me one last warning glare to ensure I knew my place. I stood alone for a moment in the shadows of the floral arrangement. I reached into my small clutch purse and felt the cold, hard plastic of the USB drive. It contained the complete financial ruin of everyone who had just threatened me. I watched my father step up to the wooden podium and tap the microphone. His booming voice echoed across the ballroom, welcoming the guests to celebrate the legacy of a woman he had actively robbed. I stepped out of the shadows and walked slowly toward the front of the room, finding my designated seat. I looked at my mother sitting one table over, beaming with fake pride as my father spoke. I caught her eye, gave her a slow, confident smile, and silently mouthed the words I had promised her. I promise you my speech is something nobody in this room will ever forget. I stood near the back of the grand ballroom, keeping my distance from the silk-draped tables. The overhead crystal chandeliers had dimmed, leaving only the sharp theatrical spotlight trained directly on the main stage. I crossed my arms over my emerald green gown, watching the spectacle unfold with the cold, detached precision of an auditor examining a fraudulent ledger. The air in the room was thick with expensive perfume and the clinking of fine crystal. Marcus approached the wooden podium first. He adjusted the microphone and let out a deep, heavy sigh that resonated perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. He was using his best Sunday morning pastoral voice, the one designed to extract tears and tithes from the congregation. He spoke about the passage of time, the heavy burden of legacy, and the tragic, cruel reality of aging. He painted a masterful, heartbreaking picture of a strong matriarch slowly losing her brilliant mind to the ravages of dementia. He told the audience how Big Mama Hattie had forgotten the names of her own grandchildren and how she could no longer manage the simple tasks of daily living. The elite guests in the audience nodded in polite, synchronized sympathy. Several prominent church mothers in the front row dabbed at their eyes with linen napkins. Vivian stepped up to the microphone next, placing a comforting, supportive hand on Marcus' shoulder. She wore her manufactured grief like a perfectly tailored accessory. She told the room how agonizing it had been to watch her mother decline over the past 2 years. She described the sleepless nights, the difficult family meetings, and the ultimate heavy decision they had to make as devoted children. Vivian announced that, for the safety and preservation of the family legacy, she and Marcus had officially assumed full legal conservatorship over Big Mama Hattie. The ballroom erupted into a gentle, supportive round of applause. The crowd actually believed they were witnessing a profound act of filial piety and familial responsibility. They had absolutely no idea they were applauding a hostile corporate takeover of an elderly woman and her entire life savings. They were clapping for two people who had mortgaged a historic civil rights era estate just to maintain a facade of wealth. But Vivian was not finished. She raised her hand to quiet the room, her diamond bracelets catching the harsh stage light. She declared that managing the Hattie Heritage Foundation in today's complex economic climate required a modern, visionary approach. She claimed that the family needed someone with an aggressive, forward-thinking financial mindset to protect the assets for the next generation. She looked out into the crowd, her face beaming with absolute manufactured pride. She told the prominent Black business owners and politicians in the room that true growth required bridging the gap between historic Southern wealth and modern Silicon Valley innovation. She announced that they were officially transferring sole managing authority of the family trust to their outstanding son-in-law. She praised Brad, calling him a pioneer in the tech industry, a brilliant venture capitalist, and the man who was ushering their family into a new era of unprecedented global prosperity. The applause that followed was deafening. The Atlanta elite clapped for the wealthy white savior who had supposedly married into their community to elevate a prominent Black family. I glanced over at the front VIP table. Chloe was sitting there glowing under the attention, her hands resting on the table to show off her rings. Around her neck, Big Mama's stolen diamond tennis necklace sparkled brightly in the dim light. She looked entirely pleased with herself, completely oblivious to the federal agents standing quietly by the exits. Brad practically strutted onto the stage. He buttoned his custom Italian suit jacket, a suit purchased with stolen retirement funds, and shook Marcus' hand with exaggerated firmness. He kissed Vivian on the cheek, playing the part of the devoted, humble son to absolute perfection. When he took the microphone, his smugness was palpable. He looked out over the sea of wealthy guests, radiating an unearned, arrogant privilege that made my blood run cold. He spoke smoothly, dropping carefully rehearsed buzzwords about fiscal responsibility, generational wealth, and market disruption. He promised to treat the family legacy with the utmost respect, claiming he would multiply their assets using cutting-edge decentralized financial instruments. He spoke with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed his race and his vocabulary made him untouchable. He looked like a billionaire. He sounded like a billionaire. No one in that room except me. And the plainclothes federal agents stationed at the doors knew he was a broke, desperate fraudster who was exactly 30 days away from total foreclosure. I watched the FBI agent standing near the velvet-draped exit. The agent did not move a muscle, but his eyes remained locked on Brad, tracking his every movement on the stage. The federal net was pulled tight, and Brad was standing right in the dead center of it, happily giving a speech to celebrate his own crimes. Brad finished his sickening speech about family unity and scanned the darkened ballroom. His eyes searched the tables, bypassing the local politicians and the church deacons until they locked onto mine. Even from the back of the room, I could see the triumphant, predatory gleam in his expression. He thought he had completely outmaneuvered me. He believed that the weight of 200 expectant guests would crush my resistance. I was convinced I would never dare to cause a scene in front of the mayor, the city council, and our entire church congregation. He thought my desire for privacy and professional decorum would force me to walk up there and hand over the keys to my 5-bedroom home. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with faux humility and weaponized charm. He called my name, letting it echo across the massive hall. He told the crowd that true wealth was about family coming together to support one another in times of massive expansion. He pointed his finger directly at me, commanding the lighting technician to swing the spotlight in my direction. The blinding white beam cut through the darkness and hit my face, illuminating my emerald green dress for the entire room to see. 200 faces turned around in their chairs to look at me. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, waiting for my response. Nia, Brad said, his voice booming through the overhead speakers with an arrogant, dictatorial edge. It is time for you to do your part. Come up here and present the final key to our new corporate headquarters. Come up here and show everyone what family unity really looks like. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The spotlight tracked my every movement as I walked up the velvet-lined steps to the main stage. The silence in the grand ballroom was deafening. 200 pairs of eyes watched me, expecting a surrender. Brad stood at the center of the stage, his hand outstretched, palm up, waiting for the keys to my 5-bedroom estate. His custom Italian suit caught the light, and his arrogant smile was etched permanently onto his face. Vivian stood just behind him, her posture rigid, her eyes practically burning holes into my forehead, warning me to fall in line. I walked right past Brad's outstretched hand. I did not even look at him. I walked straight to the edge of the stage and looked out into the darkness of the ballroom. I found the audiovisual control booth at the very back of the hall. The technician, a young guy I had slipped $500 in cash just 10 minutes before the event, caught my eye. I gave him a single sharp nod. The massive LED screen behind us went completely black. Brad's flashy corporate logo vanished. A collective gasp rippled through the audience as a stark white legal document flashed onto the 50-foot screen. The bold black letters at the top were impossible to misinterpret. Official revocation of conservatorship and power of attorney, signed, dated, and notarized by a federal judge just 3 days ago. Brad lowered his hand, his smug smile faltering. He turned to look at the screen, his brow furrowing in confusion. Marcus stepped forward, his pastoral authority crumbling into absolute panic. He pointed at the projection and yelled into his microphone, demanding the technician shut down the display. Vivian grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. She hissed under her breath, demanding to know what kind of sick joke I was playing. Before I could answer, a low, mechanical hum echoed from the side ramp of the stage. Everyone turned. An orderly from the Golden Oaks facility was pushing a motorized wheelchair up the incline. Sitting in that chair was the matriarch of our bloodline. Big Mama Hattie wore a deep purple silk suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. She did not look fragile. She looked like a queen arriving to execute traitors. Vivian let go of my arm and rushed toward the wheelchair. She immediately slipped back into her performance, pasting a look of tragic concern across her face. She reached out her hands, speaking in a loud, patronizing voice meant for the audience. "Mama, you are confused. You are sick. You are supposed to be resting at the facility. Let the nurses take you back to your room before you hurt yourself." Vivian reached down to grab the handles of the wheelchair. Big Mama Hattie did not shrink back. She raised her right hand and slapped Vivian's hand away, with a resounding crack that echoed through the microphone Marcus was holding. The entire front row of the ballroom physically recoiled. Then the impossible happened. The woman who had been diagnosed with severe cognitive decline, the woman who supposedly could not walk or feed herself, reached down and locked the brakes of her wheelchair. She planted her feet firmly on the polished wood of the stage, without leaning on the armrests, without asking for help. Big Mama Hattie stood straight up. She was a towering presence radiating decades of hard-earned authority. Vivian stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the carpet. Marcus dropped his jaw, staring at his mother, as if she had just risen from the dead. Down in the VIP section, Chloe clamped a hand over her mouth, her face draining of all color. The heavy diamond tennis necklace suddenly looked like a noose around her neck. Big Mama took 2 deliberate steps forward and snatched the microphone right out of Vivian's trembling hands. "I am not sick, and I am certainly not confused." Big Mama voice boomed across the ballroom. The rich southern timbre of her voice shook the crystal chandeliers. "I let you lock me in that facility because I wanted to see exactly how deep your greed ran. I wanted to see how fast you would sell out your own blood." The ballroom was paralyzed. The city councilmen, the mega-church pastors, the wealthy elite of Atlanta were completely frozen in their seats, watching a revered matriarch dismantle her own children. Brad's instinct to rely on his white privilege kicked in immediately. He puffed out his chest and tried to take the microphone from her, attempting to use a calm, authoritative tone to de-escalate the situation. He told the audience that this was clearly a medical episode, and that the family needed privacy to deal with a tragic mental health crisis. He reached out to guide her back to her chair, acting like he was the only reasonable adult in the room. Big Mama did not flinch. She stepped right into his personal space, forcing him to back away. "Do not you dare speak to me, you worthless parasite," Big Mama thundered. "You walked into my family acting like you were a tech genius. You wore your expensive suits and used your fancy startup words to dazzle my foolish son and my status-obsessed daughter. They were so desperate for the validation of a white son-in-law that they mortgaged the very land my husband marched and bled for. This family is so rotten it sold its own legacy just to please a failed, mediocre man." The collective shock in the room was palpable. Deacons in the front row were whispering furiously. Brad's face turned a mottled, angry red. He realized his charm offensive had completely failed. He looked at Marcus, demanding that he take control of his mother. But Marcus was speechless. Vivian was hyperventilating, her hands shaking wildly as she realized her entire social empire was disintegrating in real time. Vivian grabbed the backup microphone from the podium, her voice shrill and hysterical. She yelled to the audience, pleading with them not to listen. She insisted that her mother was hallucinating, that the dementia was making her violent and paranoid. She begged the security guards to intervene and remove her. Big Mama ignored the frantic performance of her daughter. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, her dignity absolute. She turned slowly to face me. The chaotic noise of my parents' pleading faded into the background. Big Mama looked at me with a fierce, proud glint in her dark eyes. "Granddaughter," Big Mama said, her voice slicing through the panic on the stage, "show them where my money went." I stepped up to the wooden podium exactly as Big Mama Hattie commanded. The atmosphere in the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom shifted so drastically, it felt as though the entire building had tilted on its axis. For my parents and Brad, the room must have felt like it was spinning, the polished floor dropping out from beneath their expensive designer shoes. I stood tall and pulled the encrypted silver flash drive from my small clutch purse. I slotted it directly into the podium interface and tapped the touchscreen twice. The massive LED display behind me flickered and then illuminated the entire stage with blinding, undeniable truth. A sprawling, color-coded flowchart appeared on the 50-foot screen. It was not a chaotic jumble of numbers or confusing financial jargon. It was a precise surgical map of a financial massacre designed so clearly that even a child could follow the trail of stolen wealth. I adjusted the microphone. I did not yell. I did not let a single ounce of emotion bleed into my words. I used my standard boardroom presentation voice. Cold, clear, and absolutely lethal. "Let us review the financial stewardship of Bradley. I announced, my voice ringing across the silent ballroom, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. On May 14th, exactly $2.5 million was withdrawn from the Hattie Heritage Foundation primary retirement account. As you can see on the screen, this transaction was not authorized by the account holder. It was authorized by Vivian and Marcus, acting under a fraudulent medical conservatorship they obtained by lying to a judge about my grandmother's cognitive state. I clicked a button on the podium. A high-resolution scan of the wire transfer authorization flashed onto the screen, displaying my parents' signatures next to the staggering dollar amount. A collective horrified gasp echoed from the VIP tables. I saw the mayor of Atlanta, who was sitting at table 3, slowly set his champagne glass down and push his chair back. Pastor Miller, the man who had threatened to excommunicate me just days ago, stared at the screen with his mouth hanging wide open. On May 16th, I continued pacing the stage slightly to command the space. Those funds were routed through a dummy shell corporation registered in Delaware, a company that produces absolutely nothing. 12 hours later, the entire sum was wired across international borders into an unregulated cryptocurrency wallet located in the Cayman Islands, a wallet registered exclusively to Brad. I clicked the presenter remote again. The screen zoomed in on the routing numbers, the offshore account details, and the digital signatures. I looked down at Brad. He was standing near the edge of the stage, his custom Italian suit suddenly looking like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. The smug, arrogant confidence had completely melted off his face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated animal panic. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. But here is where the great tech visionary really showed his genius, I said, leaning closer to the microphone to make sure every single syllable landed with maximum impact. On May 20th, just 4 days after securing my grandmother's entire life savings, Brad completely liquidated the account. He did not invest in decentralized finance. He did not build a revolutionary blockchain protocol. He dumped the money into a collapsing crypto exchange to cover up the fact that his startup was nothing more than a high-tech, multi-level marketing scam. There were no software developers. There was no product. The only thing Brad disrupted was his own mother-in-law bank account. He burned $2.5 million to finance his luxury car leases and to buy the very diamonds my sister is wearing tonight. The murmurs in the crowd grew into a loud, chaotic uproar. Prominent business owners who had been shaking Brad's hand and congratulating him just 20 minutes ago were now staring at him with absolute disgust. Down in the front row, Chloe was practically trying to sink through the floorboards. She unclasped the stolen diamond tennis necklace from her throat with trembling fingers and shoved it frantically into her beaded purse, trying to distance herself from the wreckage. Vivian was gripping the edge of her table, swaying back and forth as she realized her entire social empire, her reputation at the church, and her standing among the Atlanta elite was burning to ash in front of her eyes. Brad could not take it anymore. The polished white savior facade shattered into a million pieces. His face turned a violent mottled crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his crisp white collar. He charged toward the steps of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at me. He bypassed all logic and went straight to the only defense mechanism he had ever known: pure, unadulterated entitlement. "You are slandering me!" Brad roared, his voice cracking with rage. He tried to project his voice over the rising noise of the angry crowd, throwing his hands in the air. "These numbers are completely fabricated. She made these documents up because she is a bitter, jealous woman. Do not listen to her. She has always hated me because she cannot stand to see a successful white man elevating this family. She is trying to ruin my reputation out of pure spite because she is lonely and pathetic." He looked around the room, desperately searching for an ally, searching for anyone who would blindly believe his white tears over my cold, hard data. He locked eyes with my father. "Marcus, do something. Tell them she is lying. Tell them your daughter is having a mental breakdown. Fix this right now." Marcus was a man built entirely on pride and public perception. Watching his golden son-in-law crumble and knowing his own fraudulent signatures were projected on a 50-foot screen for his entire church congregation to see pushed him over the edge of reason. He saw his legacy, his status, and his freedom evaporating in real time. In a blind, desperate attempt to silence the truth and regain control of the room, Marcus scrambled up the stage steps. He lunged toward the podium. His face was contorted with a terrifying mix of panic and fury. "Shut your mouth, Nia," Marcus bellowed, raising his heavy hand high in the air, preparing to strike me right across the face in front of 200 guests. He wanted to physically assault his own daughter to force me away from the microphone to protect the scammer who had ruined our bloodline. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I planted my feet firmly on the polished wood floor and raised my left arm with lightning speed. I caught his wrist mid-air. The impact stung my palm, but my grip was like an iron vise. I locked my eyes onto his, watching the absolute shock register on his aging face as he realized he could no longer overpower me. He could no longer bully me into submission. I held his arm suspended in the air, the physical struggle frozen in time. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for my next move. I stared directly into my father's terrified eyes and let go of his wrist, pushing his arm away with disgust. "I did not make these documents, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register that carried perfectly through the microphone, cutting through the tension in the room like a razor blade. "I am just the messenger." This flowchart was compiled from a federal subpoena for financial records issued directly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I dropped my father's wrist, letting his arm fall limply to his side, and turned my full attention to Brad. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. He instinctively stumbled backward, his custom leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished wood of the stage. The camera of my mind captured his complete deterioration. He was no longer the smug tech visionary. He was a cornered rat. "Security!" Brad bellowed, his voice cracking into a frantic, high-pitched shriek. He looked past the blinding stage lights, searching the shadows of the ballroom for any staff member who would listen to him. "Where is hotel security? This is a private corporate event. This woman is trespassing and causing a public disturbance. Remove her right now." The few hotel security guards stationed near the catering exits did not move a single muscle. They had already been quietly intercepted and ordered to stand down by the plainclothes federal agents. Brad realized no one was coming to rescue him. The panic in his chest exploded into pure, unadulterated viciousness. He turned his rage toward the one person he still thought he could control. "Chloe, get up here and shut your sister up!" Brad screamed, pointing a shaking finger at his wife, who was still cowering at the VIP table. "Do your job for once in your life and handle your family. Tell them she is lying. Tell them she is crazy." Chloe scrambled up the stairs of the stage, tripping over the hem of her designer gown. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup, and the stolen diamond tennis necklace felt heavy and damning around her throat. She did not defend her husband. She rushed straight toward me, grabbing my forearm with trembling hands. "Nia, please stop this," Chloe begged, her voice a desperate, pathetic whisper. "Look at what you are doing to us. You are ruining our reputation in front of the entire church. We can figure out the money quietly. Just turn the screen off and tell them it was a prank. Please, Nia, just let us save face. I will give you whatever you want." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life using me as her personal stepping stone. She had happily plotted to steal my home to protect the very man who was currently screaming at her in front of 200 people. "You cannot save face when you have no face left to save, Chloe," I said, my voice cold and completely devoid of pity. I pulled my arm out of her grip. "You chose a fraud over your own blood. Now you get to burn with him." I stepped past my sister and closed the distance between Brad and myself. He was backed entirely against the edge of the stage with nowhere left to run. The heavy silence of the ballroom hung over us, amplifying every word I was about to speak. "You really thought it was going to be this easy," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured so the microphone picked up every single syllable. "You thought all you had to do was put on a tailored suit, throw around some Silicon Valley jargon, and play the role of the brilliant white savior. You knew my parents were so obsessed with status, so desperate for the validation of a white tech entrepreneur son-in-law, that they would literally hand you the keys to their mother vault." Brad's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. "You are a bitter, jealous woman," he spat, his mask completely gone. "You are just mad because your parents chose me to run this family instead of you." I smiled, a sharp, terrifying smile that made him shrink back another inch. "They chose you because you were a shiny object, Brad. But you made one fatal miscalculation. You forgot that I am a licensed forensic accountant. You forgot that while you were busy manipulating emotions, I was busy tracking your data. You can charm a church congregation, and you can bully my parents into selling their souls. But money never lies. The banking system does not care about your skin color or your fake elevator pitch. Every stolen dollar left a digital footprint, and I just handed that entire footprint to the federal government. Brad opened his mouth to scream another defense to try and leverage his privilege one last time, but the words never made it out of his throat. A massive, deafening crash echoed from the back of the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany double doors of the Ritz-Carlton Hall were kicked violently open, slamming against the walls with a sound like a gunshot. It was not hotel security coming to escort me off the premises. It was a tactical entry. 6 men and women strode through the entrance, moving with the terrifying coordinated precision of federal law enforcement. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were wearing dark tactical gear and navy blue windbreakers. Across the back of every single jacket, printed in bright bold yellow letters, was the acronym FBI. Special Agent Reynolds led the formation, marching straight down the center aisle. He bypassed the gasping politicians, the terrified church deacons, and the fleeing socialites. He kept his eyes locked dead on the stage. Special Agent Reynolds shouted, his voice cutting through the rising chaos of the ballroom like a thunderclap. "Do not move a single muscle. You are under arrest for elder financial abuse and federal wire fraud." Special Agent Reynolds stepped onto the polished wood of the stage, moving with a terrifying calm that instantly drained the remaining oxygen from the room. He did not care about the crystal chandeliers, the towering floral arrangements, or the elite guest list watching, in stunned silence. He walked straight up to Brad, pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt, and grabbed the great tech visionary by his custom-tailored shoulder. The loud metallic click of the cuffs, locking around Brad's wrists, echoed through the microphone that had been dropped on the floor, amplifying the sound of his absolute ruin across the grand ballroom. Brad fought back immediately. The sheer arrogance that had fueled him for years refused to die quietly. He tried to yank his arms away, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He shouted that this was a massive misunderstanding. He yelled that he was a respected venture capitalist, that he personally knew the mayor of Atlanta, and that he demanded to speak with his corporate attorneys right this second. He tried to weaponize his privilege one last time, expecting the federal agents to bow to his aggressive outrage. Special Agent Reynolds did not even blink. He shoved Brad firmly against the wooden podium and recited the federal arrest warrant loud enough for the entire front row to hear. He officially charged Bradley with multiple counts of elder financial abuse, federal wire fraud, and international money laundering. I stood perfectly still, watching the entire scene unfold. My eyes tracked the chaos with cold, calculating precision. I watched Brad, the man who had confidently swaggered into our Sunday dinners demanding respect, completely unravel. His expensive Italian suit wrinkled as the agents patted him down. His slick elevator pitch devolved into pathetic, panicked begging. He looked desperately toward the VIP tables, searching for anyone who would vouch for him. But the room had already turned against him. The elite black community of Atlanta does not tolerate a predator who targets their elders. Pastor Miller, the man who had threatened to excommunicate me from the church just a few days ago, stood up from his front row seat. His face was a mask of pure, absolute disgust. He looked directly at Marcus and shook his head slowly. The pastor did not say a single word of comfort. He simply turned his back on my family, signaled to the senior deacons, and began walking toward the exit. That single movement triggered a massive avalanche. The city councilmen, the business owners, the choir members, they all stood up in unison. The sound of hundreds of chairs scraping against the floor filled the room as the guests began a mass exodus. They were fleeing the ballroom as fast as they could, desperate to distance themselves from the toxic radioactive fallout of my parents' crimes. I looked at my father. Marcus stood completely frozen on the stage. He looked like a statue carved out of pure horror. The reality of what he had done was finally crashing down on him with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. He watched the pastor walk out the door, and in that exact moment he realized that his precious reputation was dead. But the social death was nothing compared to the financial execution. Marcus stared at the federal agents, and his eyes went entirely blank. He had mortgaged the historic Cascade Heights estate to fund a federal fugitive. He had handed over the sacred land his own father had marched and bled to secure during the civil rights movement. He gave away our family legacy to a white con artist who was currently crying in handcuffs. Marcus' knees buckled slightly, but he did not fall. He simply stood there trapped in a prison of his own making, realizing he was going to spend the rest of his life paying for a debt he could never erase. Vivian, on the other hand, completely lost her mind. The glamorous high society matriarch who had spent my entire life telling me I was an embarrassment suddenly dropped to her knees on the stage. Her $10,000 beaded gown pooled around her on the hardwood floor as she let out a loud guttural wail. She began hyperventilating, throwing her hands in the air and begging the FBI agents to stop. When they ignored her, she crawled across the floor toward Big Mama Hattie's wheelchair. Vivian grabbed the wheels of the chair, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She pleaded with her mother, claiming she had no idea the money was stolen, claiming she was tricked by Brad. She begged Big Mama to tell the agents to leave. Big Mama Hattie looked down at her daughter with eyes as hard as diamonds. She did not reach out to comfort her. She did not offer a single word of forgiveness. Big Mama simply reached down, unlocked the brakes of her wheelchair, and smoothly rolled herself backward, entirely removing herself from Vivian's grasp. She left her own daughter sobbing on the floor of a rapidly emptying ballroom. Down in the VIP section, Chloe was completely paralyzed. The golden child, the sister who had happily sent me pictures of my nieces and nephews sleeping on fake air mattresses to guilt-trip me into giving up my house, was shaking uncontrollably. She watched her husband being read his Miranda rights. She knew the federal government would be freezing all their assets within the hour. She knew the luxury cars, the designer bags, and the private school tuitions were gone forever. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a desperate pleading terror, but I offered her absolutely nothing. No sympathy, no safety net. She had chosen her side. Special Agent Reynolds and his team flanked Brad on all sides, preparing to march him out of the ballroom and into the waiting transport vehicles outside. They forcefully turned him around, guiding him toward the stage steps. As they marched him down the center aisle, their path brought them directly past where I was standing. Brad was sweating profusely, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. He locked eyes with me as he approached. The sheer hatred radiating from his face was palpable. He realized that the quiet black woman he had constantly talked over and dismissed had just orchestrated his absolute destruction without breaking a single sweat. He dug his heels into the carpet, trying to slow his momentum just enough to lean toward me. The federal agents shoved him forward, but he twisted his neck to look at me one last time. His lips curled into a vicious, desperate snarl. "You will pay for this!" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I looked at the steel handcuffs cutting into his wrists, and then I looked him dead in the eyes. I gave him a slow, sharp smile and casually shrugged my shoulders. "Your 10-year lease at federal prison just got approved." I said, my voice perfectly steady, carrying effortlessly over the chaos of the room. No security deposit required. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind the federal agents, sealing the fate of the man who thought he could steal our family legacy. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside pulsed through the massive ballroom windows, painting eerie, frantic shadows across the deserted room. The jazz band had fled the stage. The wealthy politicians were gone. The catering staff had completely vanished into the kitchen. All that remained were the spectacular ruins of my parents' social empire, scattered among overturned champagne flutes and abandoned designer jackets. Looking down from the high vaulted ceiling, we must have looked like actors on a tragic theater stage, frozen in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic explosion. Chloe finally broke out of her terrified paralysis. The illusion of her perfect life had just been hauled away in federal handcuffs, and the reality of her extreme poverty was crashing down on her all at once. She did not walk toward me. She sprinted. She tripped over the hem of her expensive evening gown and literally threw herself onto the polished hardwood floor right at my feet. Her hands desperately grabbed the fabric of my emerald green dress, clutching the silk like a drowning woman reaching for a life raft. "Nia, please," she wailed, her voice cracking under the heavy weight of her absolute desperation. "You have to save us. You are their aunt. You have to think about my 3 babies." Brad is gone and his accounts are frozen. The bank is going to lock us out of the short-term rental by tomorrow morning. We have absolutely $0 to our name. You have to let us move into your new house. We can take the basement. We can take the guest rooms. Just please do not let my children sleep on the street. I looked down at the woman gripping my dress. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the familiar tug of family obligation that had suffocated me for 32 years. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my gown and stepped back, creating a solid physical boundary between my success and her failure. Chloe, you are weaponizing your children right now because your white knight just got exposed as a federal criminal. I said, my voice entirely devoid of pity. Where was this desperate need for family unity when you were sending me photos of air mattresses, trying to guilt-trip me into financing your luxury lifestyle? Where was your sisterly compassion when you and Vivian were actively plotting to forge my signature, steal my property, and throw me into my own basement so your fraudulent husband could play real estate mogul? I did not know, she sobbed, rocking back and forth on the stage floor. I swear I did not know how bad it was. I just wanted my kids to have a good life. I cut her off immediately. You knew exactly what you were doing. You wore Big Mama stolen diamonds tonight while you planned to rob me blind. I bought my 5-bedroom house with years of grueling 80-hour work weeks. Every single brick of that property was paid for with my blood, sweat, and tears. I will never allow a traitor to sleep under my roof. You made your bed with a scammer, Chloe. Now you get to sleep in it. Across the stage, Vivian realized she had lost all leverage over me. The threat of church excommunication meant nothing now that her own pastor had walked out on her in pure disgust. Her focus shifted entirely to the woman sitting in the motorized wheelchair. Vivian crawled on her hands and knees across the wooden floor, her $10,000 beaded gown catching on the microphone wires. She threw her arms around Big Mama's knees, weeping hysterically. "Mama, please." Vivian begged, her voice shrill and broken, the pristine high society mask completely shattered. "We were just trying to grow the family wealth. We were trying to protect your legacy. Marcus and I are going to lose the Cascade Heights estate. The bank is going to foreclose and throw us in jail. You have to call the lawyers. You have to tell the federal agents you gave Brad that money willingly. You have to save your own daughter." Big Mama Hattie looked down at Vivian with an expression colder than liquid nitrogen. She did not reach out to stroke her daughter's hair. She did not offer a shred of maternal comfort. She looked at Vivian the exact same way she used to look at the racist bank managers who tried to deny her business loans in the 1960s. Absolute unyielding defiance. Big Mama leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the arms of her wheelchair. "You are not my daughter. My daughter would never forge medical documents to lock me in a clinical prison just to steal the money my late husband broke his back to earn. My daughter would never mortgage the land of her ancestors to appease a mediocre man with a fake company. You sold your soul for a front-row seat at the country club." Vivian gasped, choking on her own tears. But Big Mama continued, her voice striking like a gavel. "You want me to lie to federal agents to cover up your greed. You want me to save a house you already threw away. Let me make this perfectly clear so you never forget it. From this moment forward, I only have one granddaughter." Big Mama pointed a steady, unwavering finger directly at me. "Nee is the only blood I recognize in this room. The rest of you are dead to me. That multi-million-dollar mortgage you took out on my estate is your problem now. You and Marcus can figure out how to pay the bank, or you can figure out how to survive in federal prison. Do not ever speak to me again." Vivian collapsed onto the floor, curling into a fetal position as her entire world completely evaporated. Marcus was still standing frozen near the podium, staring into the dark abyss of his ruined pastoral career. Chloe was sobbing loudly into her hands, mourning the immediate violent loss of her fake billionaire status. I walked over to Big Mama and gently unlocked the brakes of her wheelchair. We did not say another word to the people weeping on the stage. We did not need to. The audit was complete, the accounts were settled, and the liabilities had been permanently liquidated. I guided her wheelchair down the ramp, and we walked arm in arm through the center aisle of the grand ballroom. We marched right past the overturned chairs and the spilled champagne, keeping our heads held incredibly high. We stepped out of the Ritz-Carlton and into the cool Atlanta night, leaving behind a shattered family that had finally choked on its own greed. The crisp night air of Atlanta felt like an absolute baptism as Big Mama and I stepped out of the Ritz-Carlton. We did not look back at the grand glass doors or the flashing police lights illuminating the valet stand. We simply kept our heads held high and walked away from the wreckage. Now I am sitting right here on my imported Italian leather sofa, letting the warm Georgia sunlight wash over my face. The house is completely silent except for the soft hum of the central air conditioning and the faint sound of Big Mama watching her favorite cooking shows in the custom-built master suite I designed just for her. It has been exactly 14 months since that unforgettable birthday gala. The legal system moves notoriously slow, but when it finally arrives, it hits with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. Brad truly thought his tailored suits and startup vocabulary would somehow charm a federal judge. He walked into that courtroom carrying the same arrogant white privilege he had weaponized against my family for years. But the United States Department of Justice does not care about your golf handicap or your venture capital aspirations. They care about documented wire fraud across international borders and the severe financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior citizen. When the judge brought the gavel down and handed him an 8-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, Brad actually cried. Real, genuine tears this time. He begged for leniency, claiming he was just a desperate father trying to provide for his family. The judge did not even blink. There are no angel investors in federal prison, just a concrete cell, a metal toilet, and a whole lot of time for him to think about his fake crypto empire. Chloe had to face a reality she had spent her entire adult life actively avoiding: actual hard labor. Without Brad stealing funds and without my parents having the ability to bail her out, she was immediately evicted from her secret short-term rental. The golden child was entirely stripped of her gold. Today, my older sister lives in a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment in a low-income complex on the far outskirts of the city. She works a morning shift as a receptionist at a loud, overcrowded dental clinic and spends her evenings scanning barcodes at a local discount grocery store just to keep the lights on and feed her 3 children. There are no more designer bags. There are no more stolen diamond tennis necklaces. She sends me a long, rambling email every couple of months, begging for a loan or a second chance at sisterhood. I never open them. I just drag them straight to the trash folder and empty the bin. But the most devastating fall from grace belonged to Vivian and Marcus. The bank did exactly what banks do when a commercial bridge loan defaults. They foreclosed on the historic Cascade Heights estate. The beautiful property my grandfather bought with blood and sweat during the civil rights era was auctioned off to a corporate developer, all because my parents wanted to impress a mediocre white man with a fake company. The financial ruin was catastrophic, but the social execution was absolute. Pastor Miller stood at the pulpit the Sunday following the gala and officially denounced their actions to the entire church. He called their behavior a sickening betrayal of family and faith. The entire congregation turned their backs. The prominent women who used to praise my mother for her impeccable fashion sense now actively cross the street when they see her walking. Stripped of their wealth and completely exiled from the black elite of Atlanta, my parents were forced to move into a cramped, rusted trailer park 2 hours outside the city limits. Their precious social standing, the very thing they sacrificed my mental health to protect, simply evaporated into thin air. Their phones never ring anymore. As for me, I kept my 5-bedroom house. I did not move into the basement. Instead, I hired a premium contracting team to retrofit the entire first floor into a luxury accessible suite for Big Mama Hattie. She spends her days tending to the massive rose garden in the backyard and giving me unsolicited but brilliant advice on my stock portfolio. She does not have to pretend to be a sick, confused invalid anymore. She is sharp, vibrant, and exactly where she belongs. She is living under the roof of a granddaughter who actually respects her mind and protects her legacy. I swirl the robust red wine in my crystal glass, watching the ruby liquid catch the afternoon sunlight. Society loves to force-feed us the toxic narrative that blood is thicker than water. They tell us from the time we are children that we have to forgive and forget because family is family. But they conveniently leave out the fact that some blood acts exactly like a leech, draining your energy, your finances, and your sanity until you have absolutely nothing left to give. You should never feel a single ounce of guilt for slamming a heavy oak door in the face of people who demand you live in the basement of a house you built with your own two hands. You do not owe your loyalty to anyone who only views you as a stepping stone for their own selfish ambitions. Protect your peace. Protect your assets. And if you have to burn the bridge to keep the predators from crossing it, make sure you use enough gasoline to light up the night sky. I lift my glass directly to the camera, flashing a cold, sharp smile. And most importantly, never ever piss off a forensic accountant.